Are you ready for a story where the high-stakes world of corporate power crashes headfirst into an ancient secret? Meet Clara Vance, a lawyer whose meticulous life is shattered by Julian Thorne, her ruthless billionaire CEO. He's handsome, commanding, and he hides a terrifying truth. He is a possessive alpha wolf. Clara thought she was climbing the corporate ladder. She was actually stepping onto the territory of a predator who just claimed her as his mate. This is a tale of obsession, betrayal, and a bond that defies logic. You won't want to miss a second. Smash that subscribe button now and join my pack, so you won't miss my stories. The alley air was a cocktail of damp concrete and fermented waste, but beneath it a scent sharper, more primal, sliced through the night, copper and ozone, the perfume of raw power. My breathing seized in my chest, a thin, rattling sound swallowed by the suffocating dark. He was close. I didn't need to see him. I felt him like a seismic tremor, a force of nature confined to this narrow urban canyon, and I was its trapped focal point. My heartbeat hammered a frantic, useless signal against my ribs, each thud a desperate plea to an indifferent universe. It began with the mundane, late hours at the firm, chasing deadlines under the sterile glare of a desktop monitor. Then came the creeping awareness, the shiver that wasn't from the AC, the fleeting shadow that didn't belong. I had rationalized it all as exhaustion, the city's constant thrum playing tricks on a weary mind. How hopelessly naive that felt now. Cornered, the playful paranoia had solidified into a terrifying, visceral truth. The footsteps approaching from the mouth of the alley were slow, heavy, each measured impact a final tolling bell. I pressed deeper into the rough, frigid brick wall, my skin scraping raw, eyes frantically scanning for an exit that simply didn't exist. Only the towering darkness remained, and the certainty of his arrival. A sound, low and fierce, resonated, not a human voice but a deep guttural rumble that settled in my very core, vibrating a message of menace. All logic abandoned me. A silent sob tore loose despite my struggle to remain mute. I squeezed my eyes shut, a single tear tracing a burning trail down my cheek. Not here. Please, not this way. Then a hand, immense and impossibly strong, closed around my forearm. A sharp, involuntary gasp tore past my lips. I twisted, fighting the unyielding grip, but it was like struggling against granite. Pure, blinding panic washed over me, drowning out everything but the need to escape the unknown. I was hauled forward, feet dragging on the uneven ground. The metallic wild scent intensified, a terrifying musk mixed with the coppery tang of blood. My eyes snapped open, and in the sliver of pale moonlight I saw his imposing frame, a towering silhouette against the street glow. But it was his eyes that mattered. They were not human. They burned with an intense, fierce golden light that stripped my soul bare, and reflected in their terrifying depths was a raw, undeniable hunger. He spoke no words, he didn't need to. The sheer raw power radiating off him was a communication all its own, a promise of something violent, something darkly possessive. My mind screamed a chaotic symphony of disbelief and terror. This has to be a dream. It must be a lie. But the steel grip was real. The feral glint was real. The fear was the most real thing I had ever known. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear, carrying that intoxicating primal scent. Mine, he finally rasped, the word a low, resonant rumble that shook me to my core. In that instant, I knew my life was broken and remade. The late night at the office had led me onto a path far more perilous than any contract negotiation. I was ensnared, caught in the gaze of a predator, and the most terrifying, illogical part of me registered a strange, unsettling pull toward the very danger that threatened to consume me. Chapter 1. The relentless Monday morning sun streaming through the glass facade of Zenith Corporate Tower did little to alleviate the deep, unnerving cold I'd carried since the alley encounter. I endlessly replayed the image of those golden eyes, the primitive growl, the possessive word. Was it a nightmare, a stress-induced break from reality? I longed to believe it was. Yet the persistent sense of dread, the hyper-awareness that now clung to me, whispered a different truth. I attempted to immerse myself in the stack of merger documents on my marble desk, their familiar weight usually a comforting anchor. As a junior counsel at Zenith, my life was typically governed by legal meticulousness, research deep dives, and tedious client briefs. Never had I imagined an intrusion of the otherworldly into my rigidly scheduled existence. My desk phone buzzed, flashing Mr. Thorne's office. My stomach clenched. Julian Thorne, the name etched on the building's cornerstone, the enigmatic billionaire who commanded a sprawling global portfolio with an iron grip. He was notorious for his ruthless intellect, his chilling charm, and an almost mythical aura of dominance that captivated and terrified the city's elite. In my year at Zenith, my encounters with him were rare, each leaving me rattled by a confusing mix of deference and something far less professional. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, I answered. "This is Clara Vance. Miss Vance, Mr. Thorne requests your immediate presence in his private office." His executive liaison, Miss Bellwether, delivered the instruction with chilling, formal precision. An immediate summons to the CEO's inner sanctum was catastrophic news for a junior employee. Had I missed a crucial detail in the recent Pacific Rim acquisition, overlooked a precedent in the latest brief, my mind raced through every recent file, searching for the fatal error. I stood, smoothing the creases from my charcoal suit, attempting to project a confidence that was entirely manufactured. The elevator ride to the penthouse floor stretched into an eternity. Stepping out, I entered the silent, lavish reception area. The entire city skyline lay exposed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a breathtaking vista that today only underscored my own frightening insignificance. Miss Bellwether, severe in her silk dress and perpetually unsmiling, simply nodded toward the immense mahogany doors. "Mr. Thorne is waiting." My heart pounded against my ribs as I approached. A quiet knock and a deep, melodic voice from within commanded, "Enter." The office was stunningly vast, dark, lacquered wood, supple leather, and a monolithic desk that served as the room's gravitational center. And behind it, silhouetted against the bright morning, sat Julian Thorne. He swiveled his chair and the air vanished from my lungs. It was him. The eyes, now merely a penetrating, intense dark brown, held the same piercing gaze that had terrorized my sleep. Here, bathed in the soft, expensive light, he was transformed. Flawless in a bespoke suit, dark hair neatly swept back, he exuded effortless corporate masculinity. Could this polished, powerful man be the same savage creature that cornered me? I struggled violently to reconcile the two images. "Miss Vance." His voice was deep, smooth, but contained an undercurrent that sent a familiar tremor through me. It was the same voice, just leashed, stripped of its feral edge. "Please sit down." I moved woodenly, my eyes locked on his, settling into the leather chair opposite the desk. He studied me with an unreadable expression, his gaze lingering just a moment too long. "I've reviewed your analysis on the recent Kingston property dispute," he began, his tone all business now. "Your meticulousness is noteworthy." A wave of desperate relief washed over me. It was about work. I must have been wrong. The alley must have been a feverish dream. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," I managed, keeping my voice steady. He leaned back, his eyes unwavering. "However," he continued, and the relief dissolved into a cold dread, "I sense a certain timidity in your approach, a lack of assertiveness." My jaw tightened. I took pride in my thoroughness, being labeled unassertive by the notoriously dominant Julian Thorne Strung. "I believe my work product is highly effective, Mr. Thorne," I replied, the sharpness in my tone unintentional. A fleeting, almost predatory smile touched his lips. "Indeed it is, Miss Vance, but in this world talent is merely potential. You must be willing to seize what you want, to take what is yours." His words carried a charged double meaning that amplified my unease. Was he speaking only of business strategy, or was there another, darker message hidden beneath the professional veneer? He proceeded to outline a massive new assignment, a complex legal warfare against a hostile acquisition attempt by a rival firm. He dissected the complexities of the case, his brilliant mind processing the legal and financial intricacies with terrifying speed. "I want you to head this up, Miss Vance," he commanded, his gaze pinning mine. "I believe you have the capacity, but you need to demonstrate you are formidable, not merely competent." The sheer weight of the opportunity settled heavily upon me. This was the break I had sacrificed everything for. Yet the sheer intensity of his stare, the unspoken acknowledgement in his eyes, left me profoundly unsettled. As the meeting concluded and I retreated to my floor, my mind was a chaotic mess. The man from the alley and the CEO were irrevocably the same. Why the silence? Why the denial of our encounter? I sat at my desk, the massive case file now looking far less intimidating than the questions swirling around the enigma that was my new boss. I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that my life was about to become infinitely more complicated than navigating corporate law. The predator was now my direct superior, and I had the terrifying sense I had just been thrown into the very center of his territory. Chapter 2. The case file, Zenith Holdings versus the Sinclair Group, was a monstrous edifice of corporate litigation. It sat on my desk, thick with property disputes, financial forensics, and depositions that chronicled years of corporate warfare. The rival, Silas Sinclair, was a well-known shark, and he had set his sights on a colossal infrastructure project that Julian Thorne considered crucial to his empire. The file detailed Sinclair's aggressive maneuvers, his use of every legal loophole and political pressure point to sabotage Zenith's progress. My directive was simple: find the weakness and annihilate the opposition. For 2 grueling days I lived and breathed the file. I created a bunker of my office, fueled by black coffee and the scent of aged paper. This was the gauntlet Thorne had thrown down, and I was determined to prove my worth. Pushing aside the haunting memory of his eyes and the primal growl, a sound that still echoed in the quietest corners of my mind, I focused entirely on the logic of law. The law was predictable. It did not possess glowing eyes or a scent that made my nerves hum with terrifying, exhilarating awareness. By Wednesday afternoon, I was so immersed in municipal zoning ordinances from the late 1980s that I didn't hear the door open. Struggling with those glorious bureaucratic relics, Ms. Vance. The voice, warm and laced with amusement, jolted me, causing a binder to slide precariously toward the floor. I looked up to see Ben Hayes, another junior counsel, leaning casually in the doorway, a friendly, exhausted grin on his face. Ben, with his perpetually rumpled tie and kind eyes, was one of the few genuinely non-predatory people in the firm, a welcome contrast to the corporate wolves who patrolled the halls. Just hunting for the Achilles heel that Sinclair missed, I sighed, rubbing the fatigue from my eyes. I hear Thorne handed you the Sinclair brief, Ben said, stepping in and collapsing into my visitor's chair. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. That's huge. Usually the managing partner handles anything involving Sinclair. He's that toxic. He said he wanted a fresh perspective, I answered, attempting to sound detached. Ben raised a skeptical eyebrow. A fresh perspective or a new target? He leaned forward. Be careful, Clara. Thorne is unlike any boss you'll ever have. He's intense. He doesn't just expect you to win, he expects total domination. And he has a history with Sinclair, it's legendary. My professional curiosity flared, momentarily overriding my fear. What kind of history? The usual, Ben shrugged. Old rivalry, business deals that went nuclear. The rumor is it's older, deeper than any corporate spat. All anyone knows is when Thorne and Sinclair clash, it's less of a negotiation and more like 2 alphas fighting over territory. The word alphas sent a fresh wave of that familiar shiver through me. I quickly masked it by sipping my now cold coffee. Thanks for the heads up, Ben, I'll keep that in mind. He gave me a sympathetic look. Just watch your back. Being in Thorne's spotlight is a double-edged sword. He can make you untouchable or he can break you without a second thought. After Ben left, his warning lingered, adding another layer to the Thorne enigma. 2 alphas fighting over a kill. The metaphor was disturbingly apt. I spent the remainder of the day digging into the deep history of the 2 firms. A clear pattern emerged: aggression, mutual sabotage, and public hostility. It was more than business, it was personal, visceral. That evening, determined to find my breakthrough, I descended to the firm's private archival library on the 25th floor, a silent, vaulted space smelling of antique paper and dry leather. Most staff were gone, and the deep quiet was a relief. I located the obscure section on historical city planning, pulling down heavy, dust-coated tomes. I was so engrossed in a century-old survey map, meticulously tracing the original boundary lines of the disputed land, that I didn't register his presence until he was directly behind me. The answer rarely lies in the present, Ms. Vance. One must often excavate the past. His voice was a low whisper, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the map. I froze, my heart vaulting into my throat. The scent, that unique, intoxicating fragrance of clean leather mixed with the wild, musky undertone from the alley, enveloped me, disorienting my senses. I turned slowly, pressing my back against the rigid bookshelf. Julian Thorne stood before me, his suit jacket discarded. His white shirt crisp but slightly undone, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong, powerful forearms. He looked less like a CEO and more like the predator I remembered. His dark brown eyes, the color of rich earth in the dim light, bore into mine. "Mr. Thorne," I managed to choke out, my voice barely audible. "I didn't know you were still here." "I find the best work happens after hours," he said, his gaze fixed on me. He gestured toward the document in my trembling hands. The 1912 city annexation plan, a perceptive choice. Most would overlook it. His proximity was overwhelming. He hadn't physically moved closer, yet the space between us felt non-existent. Every nerve ending was alight with a high-frequency hum of both terror and a confusing, unwelcome awareness of him as a man. I suspected there might be an old restrictive covenant or an unvacated right-of-way that Sinclair's team missed, I stammered, forcing my mind back to legalities. "And did you find it?" he asked, his voice a soft resonance. "Not the easement, but something else," I explained, my professional instincts finally taking over my fear. The original deeds for this entire district were controlled by one family, the Kensingtons. When they sold off this particular parcel decades ago, they attached a specific land use restriction. A flicker of something, respect, surprise, crossed his face. "Show me." My hand shook as I pointed to the faded, delicate script on the old document. He leaned in close to read, his shoulder brushing mine. A shockwave, like an electric current, shot through me at the contact. His warmth penetrated my blouse, and for a heart-stopping moment, all I could focus on was the coiled strength in that arm, the very same strength that had held me captive. "It requires any development on this plot to allocate a minimum of 40% of the land mass to community green space, as determined by the Kensington Trust," I explained, forcing the words out. "Sinclair's plan for high-density, exclusive condominiums would violate it. Zenith's plan, which includes the public park proposal, is compliant." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the document, yet I felt his attention entirely on me. When he finally straightened, a slow, dangerous smile spread across his lips, not a smile of warmth but a victor's expression, predatory, satisfied. "Exceptional work, Miss Vance," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate, possessive tone. "I knew you had that killer instinct, you just needed the right focus." He held my gaze, and in the depths of his eyes I saw it again, that fleeting, unnatural glint of gold. The polished CEO vanished, the monster from the alley was looking back at me. He took a swift step back, breaking the suffocating spell. "I want this motion on Sinclair's desk by 8 tomorrow morning. I want him to know he is already beaten." He turned and walked away, his departure silent on the library carpet. I stood frozen, my back cemented to the bookshelf, my heart drumming a frantic beat. I had found the key to absolute victory, a win that would skyrocket my career. But standing alone in the silence, I knew with a chilling clarity that I had just won a battle in a much larger, far more dangerous war. I had proven I had teeth, and I had the terrifying realization that I had just bared them to a more dominant predator. My triumph felt less like my own and more like I had just become his most valuable weapon. Chapter 3. The restrictive covenant motion landed on Sealer Sinclair's desk at 8:00 a.m. sharp. By 9:15 a.m., the entire Zenith legal department was vibrating with excitement. By lunchtime, it felt like the entire city knew my name. The century-old Kensington decree I had unearthed was an elegant, irrefutable checkmate. Sinclair's legal team was caught completely off guard, scrambling to file stay motions and demanding emergency injunctions, but the damage was total. In a single night of exhaustive research, I had neutralized their multi-million-dollar challenge and guaranteed Zenith's claim on the crucial real estate. My inbox was flooded with congratulatory messages. Senior partners who had previously ignored me in the elevator now made detours past my office to offer their effusive compliments. Ben swung by with 2 celebratory Danish pastries, his eyes wide with a mix of genuine pride and apprehension. "You didn't just find a loophole, Clara," he whispered, setting the pastries down. "You executed a perfect tactical nuke. I heard Sinclair himself called Thorne this morning. The rumor is the shouting was audible from the lobby." "I was simply doing my job," I murmured, a strange feeling of alienation from the victory settling over me. "No, you were doing his job," Ben corrected, his voice low. "You've been anointed as his secret weapon. The whispers are everywhere. Just be careful. The view from the top is intoxicating, but the fall is brutal." His warning perfectly echoed my own creeping fears. I was no longer merely a meticulous lawyer. I was rapidly becoming an extension of Julian Thorne's will, and his behavior over the following week solidified this unsettling reality. My name was suddenly on the attendee list for high-level strategy sessions. He began summoning me to his private office to consult on matters far exceeding my pay grade, his piercing gaze tracking my every contribution. He would listen with an unnerving, patient stillness, and whenever I made a particularly incisive legal point, that subtle, predatory smile would appear. The professional validation was an intoxicating high, a reward I had chased my entire career, but it was perpetually tainted by the man delivering it. In public, he was all business. But the moments in private were electric with unspoken tension. He started addressing me by my first name when we were alone. "Clara, your take on this?" An impressive strategic pivot, Clara. Each use of my name was a low, vibrational sound that seemed to bypass my ears and settle deep in my stomach, a subtle, constant claiming. Once, while navigating a crowded doorway after a board meeting, he placed his hand on the small of my back to guide me through, and the brief, searing touch felt less like a courtesy and more like a possessive brand. My skin flushed, painfully aware of his firm fingers against the fabric of my suit. Then came the invitation. It wasn't a standard email or a memo. It was a thick, ivory card placed carefully on my desk one afternoon, my name inscribed in elegant, masculine script. It was an invitation to the annual Governor's Benefit Gala, the most exclusive social event of the year. Tucked inside was a handwritten note from Julian. "Clara, your triumph deserves public recognition. You will be my guest at the Governor's Gala this Saturday. Transportation will arrive at 7. It was not an offer, it was an unequivocal command, thinly veiled in professional praise. To decline would be career suicide, a direct rejection of the man single-handedly propelling me to prominence. I had no choice. I was his weapon, and now it seemed I was also to be his trophy. On the night of the gala, I was a wreck of nerves. I'd spent an obscene amount on a midnight blue, floor-length gown that was subtly sophisticated and felt strangely like armor. Staring at my reflection, I saw a stranger, a woman who looked entirely composed, masking the internal chaos. The sleek black limousine arrived precisely at 7. The drive to the ornate ballroom was silent and swift, a peaceful journey toward an impending storm. Upon arrival, Julian was waiting for me just inside the massive entrance. The sight of him stole my breath. He was devastatingly perfect in a custom tuxedo, a portrait of masculine grace and power. But as he turned and his eyes found mine, I saw the familiar, feral intensity beneath the civilized veneer. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, appreciative hum. His gaze slowly traveled over me, a possessive, comprehensive appraisal that left me feeling both exquisitely exposed and profoundly seen. "You are truly captivating." "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "Julian," he corrected softly, extending his arm. "Tonight we are not in the office." Placing my hand on his arm was a physical shock. His bicep was rigid like steel beneath the wool. A palpable current of energy flowed from him to me, hypersensitizing my every sense. The murmur of the crowd, the crystal chime of glasses, the bouquet of expensive florals, it all sharpened. But above all it was his scent, that complex blend of sharp spice and wild musk, that dominated everything. He led me through the glittering crowd of the city's most influential figures. He introduced me not as a junior lawyer but as the brilliant legal architect behind Zenith's recent stunning victory. Heads turned, whispers trailed us. He was showcasing me, elevating me to a platform of his own making, and the message was unmistakable to everyone present. This woman is mine. We stood by the tall arched windows overlooking the spectacular city lights when a voice, dripping with contempt, cut through the din. "Thorne. I should have guessed you'd be here parading your newest acquisition." I turned to see Silas Sinclair. He was handsome, polished, and powerful, but his eyes were cold chips of ice. His venomous gaze wasn't on Julian, it was fixed solely on me. "Sinclair," Julian's voice dropped, shedding all social grace for a hard, dangerous edge. The arm beneath my hand tensed, the muscles coiling. "Learn some decorum." Sinclair ignored him, taking a step closer to me. "Clara Vance. Quite the brilliant little trick you performed with that covenant. You must be very proud. But a word of caution, when you share a kennel with dogs you inevitably acquire fleas. And he," Sinclair jerked his chin toward Julian, "is more of a rabid wolf than a dog." A fear, cold and sharp, sliced through me. The casual, venomous use of the word wolf felt too knowing, too specific. Before I could formulate a reply, Julian moved. It was a minimal, commanding shift. He stepped partially in front of me, a human shield, his posture radiating pure, undiluted menace. The air around us became thick, almost electric. "That's enough, Silas." Julian's voice was a low growl, a sound that triggered a full-body tremor, instantly recognizable from the alley. "Exit now." Sinclair's eyes flickered, showing a momentary flash of what looked like genuine fear before he hid it behind a sneer. He gave a mocking bow and retreated into the crowd. The instant he was gone, the tension in Julian's body eased, though only slightly. He turned to me, his jaw tight, his intense eyes blazing with a protective fire that was somehow more frightening than his anger. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing my cheek in a gesture of such unexpected tenderness that my breath hitched. "Men like Sinclair only comprehend one language, force," he said, his voice softening but maintaining that dangerous undercurrent. "I apologize that you were exposed to his filth." I stared up at him, my mind reeling. The creature who had cornered me was now my fierce defender. The man whose power terrified me had just shielded me without hesitation. My carefully constructed walls of fear and professionalism began to fracture, replaced by a bewildering, treacherous sense of confusion. He was a predator, a monster, my boss, my potential captor. But in that moment, as his thumb rested gently on my skin, a terrifying new question arose. Was it possible he was also my protector? Chapter 4. The remainder of the gala passed in an overwhelming blur. Julian did not leave my side, his hand a constant, possessive weight on the small of my back. His presence was an invisible fortress. No one dared approach us with anything less than fawning deference. The conversation was innocuous, focused on finance and social gossip, yet the air between us crackled with the heavy aftermath of the confrontation with Sinclair. I was acutely aware of his every subtle shift in posture, every minute flex of his fingers against my gown. He was a tightly wound coil, the powerful CEO persona a fragile disguise over the raw, primal force I now knew lay beneath. The car ride back was enveloped in a suffocating silence, the city lights streaking fleeting patterns across Julian's stoic profile. The adrenaline had faded, leaving me feeling exhausted and profoundly unsettled. The boundaries had dissolved. The alley monster and the powerful man beside me were one and the same. The terrifying part was that my fear was steadily intertwining with a deep, consuming curiosity. Why the fierce protection? What did his possessive claim of mine truly signify? The car glided to a stop outside my modest apartment building, its sleek blackness a jarring contrast to the familiar brick facade. Before the chauffeur could react, Julian opened his own door and rounded the car. He opened mine, extending his hand. I hesitated only for a heartbeat before placing my hand in his. His grip was warm, firm, entirely enveloping my smaller hand. He walked me to the main entrance, the silence stretching tautly between us. I fumbled in my clutch for my keys, my fingers clumsy under his watchful gaze. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet in the late-night stillness. I looked up at him under the porch light's soft glow. His eyes seemed darker, deeper, the golden flecks almost imperceptible, but the magnetic pull holding me fast. "Sinclair will not approach you again," he stated. It was not a comfort, it was a vow delivered with the chilling finality of a predator securing its territory. "How can you be so certain?" I whispered, the question escaping before I could stop it. A dark, enigmatic smile touched his lips. because he understands the consequences. He took a half step closer and my back met the cold wood of the door. He wasn't touching me, yet I felt entirely caged by his proximity, by the overwhelming force of his presence. He knows that what belongs to me is off limits. There it was again, the possessive assertion. My heart slammed against my ribs. I don't belong to you, Julian. The words were a defiant whisper, the final stand of my autonomy against the powerful current of his dominance. He leaned in closer, his face just inches from mine. I felt the warmth of his breath on my skin. I could see the complex patterns in his dark eyes. The scent of him, clean, masculine, and devastatingly wild, was all I could inhale. "Don't you?" he murmured, his voice a low, hypnotic purr that sent shivers racing down my spine. "You felt it too, didn't you? In that alley, a recognition, something primal that supersedes contracts and fear." He reached up, his fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw. His touch was both an undeniable demand and a raw declaration. "You're not truly afraid of the monster, Clara. You're afraid of the part of you that isn't afraid." My breath hitched. He had articulated the terrifying truth. The fear was real, but beneath it, a dark, exhilarating undercurrent persisted, a connection, an irresistible pull toward the very power that should have repelled me. Before I could process his words, before I could push him away or, God forbid, lean into his touch, his lips claimed mine. It was not a tender exploration. It was a brand, fierce, demanding, and utterly consuming. It was a kiss that tasted of secrets, power, and a deep, ancient hunger. For one heart-stopping moment I was utterly lost. My mind blanked. All my fear and confusion were incinerated by the raw, shocking heat of his mouth. A whimper rose in my throat as his hand moved from my jaw to the back of my neck, his fingers tightening gently in my hair, holding me fast. And as swiftly as it began, it ended. He pulled back, his breath uneven, his eyes blazing with an emotion so raw it bordered on frightening. He searched my face for a long moment, as if reading the answer to a question he hadn't dared ask. Then, without a single word, he turned and walked back to the waiting car, leaving me trembling and breathless against my front door. I stumbled into my apartment, locking the door and leaning against the cold wood, my legs weak. I raised a shaking hand to my lips. They still throbbed, still burned from the force of his kiss. It wasn't merely a kiss, it was a claiming. He had staked his territory, not with a growl in the dark, but with a searing, undeniable act of possession. Sleep was impossible. I paced my living room, the beautiful gown feeling like a costume from a life I no longer inhabited. The world of corporate law, with its rigid rules, felt a million miles away. I had been plunged into a world of shadows and predators, where the language was not of legal precedent, but of dominance, power, and an irresistible, terrifying bond. The wolf had revealed himself, not to destroy me, but to claim me. And the most frightening realization of all was the quiet, treacherous voice deep inside me that whispered. It felt like coming home. I was his weapon, his trophy, and now, after that kiss, I was undeniably his. The only question that remained was, what precisely did that mean for me? Chapter 5. Walking into the office on Monday felt like stepping onto a stage under a spotlight I hadn't agreed to. Every nerve in my body was acutely aware, and the mundane sounds of the firm, the low chatter, the ringing phones, seemed invasive. I felt as if the events of Saturday night were physically etched onto my expression, as if every person could see the phantom heat of Julian's kiss still branded on my mouth. I half expected him to be waiting for me to demand a reckoning, to resume the shocking intimacy. But he was. The day proceeded with a disquieting sense of normality, yet everything was fundamentally altered. When he summoned me for a briefing on the Sinclair settlement, his professional demeanor was immaculate, but his eyes betrayed him. The way he looked at me was no longer just the intense gaze of a demanding CEO, it was knowing. It was a private communication in a room full of executives, a silent acknowledgement of the boundary we had obliterated. A possessive fire smoldered constantly in their depths, a silent, blazing reminder that he had claimed me, and that I knew it. It was maddening. He was the architect of a game where he alone understood the rules. During the meeting, he publicly deferred to my judgment on a high-stakes financial point. His quiet praise ringing out, "Clara possesses an unparalleled strategic mind for this complexity." The statement sent a ripple of impressed murmurs through the room of senior partners. It was a calculated move, cementing my elevated status while simultaneously binding me tighter to him. I felt like a prized falcon on the wrist of its master, given the freedom to hunt, but always tethered, always belonging to him. The transformation was not lost on my colleagues. Whispers tracked me in the hallways. Ben intercepted me by the espresso machine, his expression a mixture of caution and curiosity. "So," he began, attempting nonchalance, "the gala with him, that's a significant upgrade." "It was a professional obligation, Ben," I said, my voice sharper than intended. "Right, an obligation where you single-handedly crushed his rival and became Thorne's pet project," he countered, his voice dropping to a low tone. "People are talking, Clara. They're saying you're more than just his lawyer." "Let them talk," I snapped, turning away, my cheeks burning, but his words were already echoing in my mind. More than just his lawyer, I was, but what exactly I was I still couldn't grasp. That evening I went home not to rest but to fight back. I was a lawyer, my life was built on logic, evidence and precedent. I dealt in facts, not terrifying, inexplicable feelings or soul-shattering kisses. If Julian Thorne was playing a game, I would use the only weapon I had, my intellect. I would not be a pawn. I opened my personal laptop, the familiar glow of the screen a comforting contrast to the dark reality of my apartment. My fingers flew across the keys, not searching for case law, but for every obscure detail I could find on Julian Thorne and his family. The public records were standard, an ancestry of immense wealth, shrewd financiers who had built a quiet fortune over generations, with Julian as the most aggressive CEO in their history. They were notoriously private, philanthropic but deeply reclusive. I dug deeper. I bypassed the mainstream finance articles and searched local histories, dusty archival news and genealogical records. I discovered that the Thorne family had maintained an enormous isolated estate upstate for over 2 centuries, a vast, untouched tract of protected woodland. It was bizarre for a family of real estate moguls to keep their most valuable acreage completely undeveloped. Then I found the first concrete piece of the impossible puzzle. A small, local newspaper article dated 35 years ago. The headline read, "Local camper vanishes. Authorities suspect animal attack." The victim was last seen near the boundary of the Thorne estate. His body was never recovered, but his shredded tent and massive, unidentifiable canine tracks were found. The article quoted the regional sheriff. "The tracks are too large for any indigenous wolf species, much bigger than any bear on record. We have never encountered anything like it." The case went cold immediately. My blood ran cold. Unidentifiable canine tracks. Ben's words echoed, more of a rabid wolf than a dog. I kept digging, my heart thudding with grim, fearful determination. I located the Thorne family crest in an old historical society database. It was complex, featuring a hawk and a stoic stag, but concealed within the ornate scrollwork at the base of the shield was a wolf, a snarling head thrown back in a silent, stylized howl. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture my logical mind violently screamed to reject. Ancient families, vast, hidden wilderness estates. Mysterious animal violence, wolf symbolism. It was the substance of Gothic fiction, of folklore and fantasy. It could not possibly be real, and yet, the golden eyes, the guttural sound, the primal strength in his grip, the possessive, territorial way he spoke of me. It was all real. I worked through the night, falling into a rabbit hole of local legends and whispered stories about the guardians of Thorne Woods. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the sky in cool shades of violet and grey, I was exhausted but absolutely resolute. I had no proof that would survive in a court of law, but I had a theory, a terrifying, impossible theory that explained everything. I must have succumbed to exhaustion at my desk because I woke with a jolt to the insistent buzzing of my phone. It was a text from Julian's office. "Mr. Thorne requires your presence." Now, my stomach twisted into a painful knot. He knew. Of course he knew. A man with his reach, his control, his resources. He would have been instantly aware the moment I typed his name into the archival search engine. When I arrived on the penthouse floor, Miss Bellwether wordlessly waved me into his private office, her expression unreadable. I stepped inside and instantly caught my breath. Julian was standing by the expansive window, his back to me, staring out at the waking city, the picture of calm, controlled power. On the polished surface of his colossal desk, angled precisely toward the visitor's chair, was a single sheet of paper, my search history. He turned slowly and my blood froze. There was no longer any pretense. The corporate mask had completely dissolved. His eyes, no longer just flecked with gold but seeming to shimmer with an internal fire, were fixed on me. They held an ancient, predatory intelligence that had no place in the world of finance. "You've been busy, Clara," he said, his voice a soft, dangerous resonance. He gestured toward the chair. "Sit," I obeyed, my legs shaking. I could not tear my gaze from his. He walked around the desk and leaned against the edge, towering over me. He picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the desperate list of my late-night inquiries. The Kensington Covenant, the Thorne family crest, the Cortland County Sheriff's cold cases from 1990. He read aloud, his voice laced with dark, quiet amusement. "You managed to connect data points others don't even perceive. I knew you were intelligent. I didn't realize you were this perceptive." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What are you?" I whispered, the question hanging in the silent, sunlit office like an executioner's final word. He dropped the paper onto the desk. A slow, chilling smile spread across his lips, a smile that failed to reach his incandescent eyes. He leaned down, placing his large hands on the arms of my chair, effectively cagging me in. His face was inches from mine, and I saw it now, clear and undeniable. The pupils of his eyes were rapidly dilating, the dark irises bleeding into a terrifying, luminous gold. "You're a lawyer, Clara," he murmured, his voice a hypnotic, guttural purr that vibrated through my bones. "You value the truth, so allow me to show it to you." And as I watched, transfixed in his terrifying gaze, the change I had only read about in fearful stories and midnight legends began. His features sharpened, the handsome angles of his face becoming harder, more feral. The golden fire in his eyes intensified until they were entirely non-human. They were the eyes of the wolf. "The legends you found," he breathed, his voice a low growl now. "They barely scratched the surface." Chapter 6. Time ceased to be linear in the silent, sun-drenched penthouse. My mind, a fortress of reason and structure, fought a losing, frantic battle against the impossible sight before me. The golden blaze in Julian's eyes was not an illusion. It was a living flame, an ancient, feral energy that instantly vaporized all remnants of his human facade. The transformation was swift but profound. His handsome features sharpened, the clean lines of his jaw becoming harder, more predatory. I saw the very tips of his canines lengthen, just a sliver, but enough to glint ominously in the light, turning his amused expression into a threatening snarl. A low, powerful growl, deeper than any human sound, rumbled in his chest, a vibration I felt from the soles of my feet to the deepest marrow of my bones. This was no man playing a cruel game. This was an apex predator allowing me a brief, terrifying glimpse of the monster residing beneath the skin of the billionaire CEO. My breath was trapped. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. My body had entered a state of pure, primal shock, a stasis beyond fear where the brain simply cannot compute the reality. The carefully constructed reality of my life, my legal career, my logic, my ambition, was a flimsy shell dissolving before a horrifying, breathing truth. As quickly as it began, the physical manifestation subsided. Golden fire in his eyes receded, softening back to their intense dark brown, though the dangerous light remained. His features settled back into the familiar, commanding face of Julian Thorne. He straightened, releasing the cage he had formed around my chair, and walked back to the window, granting me vital space. "My family carries a unique distinction," he stated, his voice now weighted with an ancient seriousness. He stared out at the city, a king surveying his domain. "We are protectors, guardians. We have been for centuries. The land we maintain upstate is not merely real estate, it is a sanctuary, a part of our territory." He turned to face me, all trace of amusement gone. "The term you likely discovered is werewolf. It is a simplistic, vulgar word for what we are. We are shifters, and I am the alpha of the North American pack." The words, impossibly insane, struck with the undeniable, crushing force of reality. All the pieces, his power, his intensity, his rivalry with Sinclair, the terrifying alley encounter, slotted into a perfect dark configuration. Sinclair, I whispered, the name now carrying a new resonance of primal hatred. He's an alpha too, Julian confirmed, his jaw tight with what felt like ancient loathing. His pack is expansionist, aggressively territorial. They view humans as expendable. For years he has tried to encroach on my domain, not just in business but in our world. That downtown plot is not about profit for him, it is about establishing a foothold. It is a declaration of war. The terrifying logic of the situation settled over me. Their feud was not corporate, it was a primal territorial war between two apex predators, and I had been unknowingly placed directly in the line of fire. And me? I asked the most vital question. Why me, that night in the alley, what was that? He walked back toward me, stopping just short of the desk. For the first time I saw a flicker of something uncertain in his eyes, a hairline fracture in his absolute control. That is more complex, he admitted, his voice softening, becoming almost vulnerable. For our kind, there are things that transcend choice, instincts, connections forged on a level you cannot yet grasp. Some call it destiny. My kind has a different word. He paused, his gaze locking with mine, raw and desperate. Mate. The word hung between us, terrifying and intoxicating. I was not looking for you, Clara. I was tracking Sinclair's scent near my territory, your office building. I was in a heightened state and then I caught your scent. It was like a beacon, a signal fire. The wolf inside me recognized you instantaneously before the man even could. His expression was filled with a pained regret I never would have expected. The alley, that was a violation. That was not the meeting I wanted. That was the animal acting on pure, desperate instinct. It found its mate, and its only thought was to claim and to protect. He was attempting to reframe my deepest trauma as a preordained cosmic event. My logical mind screamed in furious protest, but my heart listened. He was confirming that the terrifying, illogical pull I felt toward him was real, an ancient connection beyond either of our control. He rounded the desk and dropped to one knee before my chair, a gesture of shocking, profound supplication from this fiercely dominant man. He took my hands in his touch now surprisingly gentle. I have just utterly shattered your entire world, Clara, he said, his golden brown eyes pleading with me. I have unveiled a secret that could destroy us all. I have laid the terrible truth of what I am at your feet. And now, despite the desperate screaming of every instinct I possess to lock you away and keep you safe, I must give you a choice. His vulnerability was more disarming than any show of force could have been. This was the weakness Ben never imagined. You can walk out that door, he said, his voice tight with emotion. I will not stop you. I will have my pack watch over you, protect you from a distance, because Sinclair now knows you are important to me, and that makes you a target. You can attempt to forget that any of this ever happened. Or, he squeezed my hands, his voice a husky whisper, or you can stay. You can choose to step into my world, a world of unimaginable danger, yes, but also a world you were always destined to be a part of, with me. He was offering me his world, his absolute protection himself. He was placing his life, his secret, his very existence into my hands, an ultimate act of faith from a creature born of supreme power and control. I looked down at our joined hands, then up into his eyes. I saw the alpha, the predator, the ruthless CEO. But now I also saw the man, a man burdened by an ancient legacy, struggling against his own primitive instincts for the sake of the woman he believed was his other half. The cold knot of fear was still present in my stomach. My life as I knew it was irrevocably finished, but as I looked at him, truly looked at him, I realized he was profoundly wrong about one thing. He wasn't the monster I was afraid of. The real monster was the thought of walking away, of returning to my simple, black and white world, and spending the rest of my life consumed by the mystery of the breathtaking, terrifying, golden-eyed world he had just offered me. My choice was never about safety versus danger. It was about existing in the shadows or stepping into the consuming, exhilarating fire. I said nothing. I didn't need to. I simply tightened my grip on his hands, a silent answer that he seemed to understand completely. A slow, genuine smile, the first I had ever seen from him, illuminated his face, and in his eyes I saw not the feral blaze of a wolf, but the fierce, unwavering light of a king who had finally found his queen. And so Clara's world is fractured and reborn. The life she knew is over, replaced by a terrifying and thrilling truth. She has looked a monster in the eyes and chosen not to run but to take his hand. Their story, however, is far from over. This choice is not an ending, but the beginning of a war fought on two fronts, one against rivals like Clara Sinclair, who now see her as a critical weakness, and one within herself, as she learns to navigate the soul-deep bond she shares with the alpha who has claimed her. Thank you for immersing yourself in the world of the billionaire alpha in disguise. Clara has made her choice, but the real question remains: can a human truly survive in a world ruled by wolves? If you are desperate to know what Clara Sinclair does next, or how Clara and Julian's fated, explosive relationship develops, then you need to join our pack. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell, because Chapter 7 is coming, and the stakes are about to get a whole lot higher. Let me know in the comments, what do you think Clara's first move as the alpha's mate should be? I read every single comment and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on this story.